Death Row was the main record label in the 90s, but at the same time, it can be called the bloodiest and most ruthless label in history. Such famous rappers as Tupac, Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, and others were a part of it. In this video, we will tell you the story of the rise and fall of Death Row Records, owned by Suge Knight. Subscribe to the Music Vibe channel, and here we go. The music that came out of the Compton area in the late 80s forever changed the course of hip-hop, both artistically and politically. No one has played a more decisive role in this transformation than NWA, the founding rap group that America has come to love and hate. At the forefront was Dr. Dre, the producer who developed the direction of the group's debut, the foul-mouthed and hostile album Straight Outta Compton, a record that pushed aside radio to connect with the streets. The cries of skeptics about immorality were silenced by poems detailing violence, drugs, sex, and police brutality in South Central amid hundreds of thousands of record sales. This is the earliest part of this book's story. NWA raked in money, but the artists behind the music did not receive proper compensation. After financial disputes and other disagreements, Dr. Dre and his partner DOC decided to break out of the cycle of exploitation. It was there that they met the future rap music mogul Marion Suge Knight, an imposing 350-pound beast who will later be called the scariest man in the hip-hop industry. Before becoming the big baller of the music business and before landing the position of DOC's manager, Suge worked as a bodyguard for Bobby Brown. Vowing to make the label the new Motown of the 90s, Suge co-founded Death Row Records with Dre and DOC after they had trouble with Ruthless Records. Easy would later claim in the lawsuit that Suge and his squad threatened him with lead pipes and baseball bats.
Suge tried to destroy my record company with the help of others, Dre.
But you probably already know this if you watched the movie Straight Outta Compton.
Releasing Dre and DOC from Ruthless.
Even the NWA couldn't escape Knight's terror and hired security to try to deal with him. In a panic, NWA's manager Jerry Heller hired security in the form of two weightlifting champions. When Knight tried to catch Heller in his office off guard with a visit but found that he was not there, Knight took out his frustration on his two people, forcing them to crawl on the floor and bark like dogs. With the assistance of Dick Griffey, the owner of Solar Records, who offered the young label an office and studio in Hollywood, Death Row Enterprise already had its own habitat, but the label needed some serious funding. The money would come from Michael Harry O. Harris, one of the biggest cocaine kings of Los Angeles, who legitimized his entrepreneurial image through various means, including the production of the Broadway play Checkmates, which, by the way, gave Denzel Washington a start on the big stage. At the time, Harris was jailed on drug possession and attempted murder charges. Therefore, it was his lawyer David Kenner, the best lawyer with Hollywood connections, who brokered the deal with Suge. With Kenner overseeing the negotiations, Harris invested $1.5 million as a silent partner in Death Row for a 50% stake. The public announcement of the partnership took place at a label promotion party organized at the famous Chasen restaurant in Beverly Hills. The flyers with invitations to this party also had interesting criminal undertones, which seemed to foreshadow the impending chaos in the music industry in the following years. So, Death Row finally got a share in the game. The Los Angeles-based company Interscope, ran by Ted Field and Jimmy Lovin, was on the verge of bankruptcy, but they decided to make a final bet and release the long-awaited solo debut of Dre, at the sounds of which the blood of listeners around the world boiled. The Chronic did not disappoint, becoming a multi-platinum milestone that would define the sound of G-Funk and the scope of all achievements after that.
Like that and like this and it's like that and like this and like that and it's like this and like that and like this and
The debut of Doggy Style by his protege Snoop Doggy Dogg and the next 4 Death Row albums after him received platinum status.
House with the pound like every day, and I'm right back up in you with Dr. Dre.
Militant politics and deep lyrics, a reflection of social problems, the era of crack and cocaine which turned Los Angeles into a war zone, made Death Row an inevitable cultural belonging. The label also took Nate Dogg, the Dog Pound, RBX, The Outlaws, Corrupt, and Lady of Rage under its wing, who made uncompromising and attractive music.
Homie hemmed up and they all around. Can't none of them see him if they going straight down for pound. They wanna come up real quick before they...
But without a doubt, the jewel of the label was Tupac, who was released on bail from New York prison thanks to Suge Knight, where he served time for sexual assault.
Baby got a problem saying bye-bye, just another hazard of a fly guy. Your ass wide open.
He immediately signed a contract for several albums with Death Row basically on a piece of toilet paper and released All Eyes on Me, the first double album in rap and one of the fastest selling rap albums in history. Songs like California Love and Two of America's Most Wanted were a testament to the undeniable chemistry of the trio, Dre, Snoop, and Tupac, which produced one of the most memorable and groundbreaking milestones of 90s music under the watchful eye of Suge Knight.
Bail, fresh out of jail, California dreaming. Soon as I step on the scene, I'm hearing hoochie screaming. West side, and I can make you famous. Brothers been down for years, so how can they blame us?
With these hit makers, Death Row became the owners of the largest collection of hip-hop superstars simultaneously on the same label. Suge Knight and the guys were rolling in money. But few people know the behind the scenes of the label and how Suge Knight resolved his problems with people. A former representative of the label, whose name is Corrupt, told how Suge Knight treated his employees. He did not remember what exactly the victim did, but it was 20 years ago. Suge asked to find a bucket and for everyone present to relieve themselves in it. "Where's the bucket?" asked Knight. "You drink this or I'll kick your ass." According to Corrupt, the worker, fearing for his life and at the same time trying to protect what little remained from his pride, screamed. He begged for another option. Any option. It was a request for Knight, the most imposing, terrifying, and successful man in America. He replied indifferently, "What do you choose? It's your time to shine." The employee drank the urine. He was fired and Corrupt never heard from him again. Or a moment from 1995 that will shock you. Having quarreled with cigar swallower Knight over business, the manager of House of Pain in Cypress Hill, Happy Walters, mysteriously disappeared while withdrawing money from an ATM, leaving behind only a wallet. He was spotted 3 days later staggering around the Long Beach area of Los Angeles, covered in burns that are believed to have been made by a cigar. His head was shaved. When Walters recovered, enough for the police to question him, he refused to tell who his kidnappers were, but no sooner had his hair grown out than he fired a number of artists from his own record label. Well, starting 95, problems began to appear. It all started at the Source Awards in 1995, where Death Row was very coldly greeted by a crowd from New York. All it took to unleash a full-scale war was a single comment by Suge referring to Puff Daddy, the CEO of Bad Boy.
Any artists out there want to be an artist and want to stay a star and don't want to have to worry about the executive producer trying to be all in the videos, all on the record, dancing. Come to Death Row.
These famous and sad words became the main catalyst for the outbreak of a major war between the East and West Coasts. The already tense relations after Tupac was shot and robbed in a hotel lobby in 1994 suddenly turned into a real storm. Hit 'Em Up confirmed this feud in the incomparable manner of Tupac, hurling harsh insults at the Bad Boy label and its main star, the notorious B.I.G.
Who shot ya? Separate the weak from the ops. Leap hard to creep them Brooklyn streets.
Although, according to Biggie, this track was recorded before the attempt on Tupac. Well, the label started falling apart, both inside and out. Its studio became a hotbed for Suge's cronies, consisting of gang members and Los Angeles police officers, later involved in the Rampart scandal. The head of the label, emboldened by such an environment, became even tougher in his behavior within the company. Snoop Dogg described the situation in the studio as follows: "Everyone was in his stranglehold. As Death Row's rebellious appeal grew, so did its bloody aura. Another telling moment is that Suge and Kenner betrayed their former business partners. Such an unhealthy environment did not contribute to the writing and release of new albums, and in March 1996, Dr. Dre leaves Death Row, later creating his own label, Aftermath. On September 7th, 1996, 6 months after Dre's departure, Tupac was shot dead on a Las Vegas road while sitting in the passenger seat of a BMW 750L, driven by Suge Knight. In the hospital, he was put into an artificial coma, but on the afternoon of September 13th, he still died. Just 3 hours before the shooting, Suge got into a fight with Orlando Anderson, who later became the main suspect in the Tupac murder case. The fight was filmed on the MGM Grand Hotel surveillance camera, and this footage was used to accuse Suge of violating parole, for which he received 9 years in prison, later serving only half the sentence.
What was the last thing that he said to you?
They love me. We was in the, we was going in, we was on a thing that was getting there. I like, Pac, we the last one left. When we talking, that's how we talking. He said, I'm straight. I love you, homie. I'm gonna be straight. I love you too. Woo, woo. That's what it was. Tupac loved Death Row. Tupac loved me. I loved him.
The events of that evening created more problems for Death Row than the loss of its top-selling artist. Knight, who had been on probation for assault, was arrested for his role in the fight at the MGM Grand. In February 1997, after a short but highly publicized trial, Knight's probation was revoked and he was sentenced to 9 years in prison in the California State Penitentiary. From the beginning of the company's creation, Death Row had been dominated and shaped by Knight. According to Lynn Hirschberg, writing in the New York Times, Knight was on top of everything at Death Row, from choosing artwork, promotional materials, singles, and the track for the B-side to hiring the video director. As California law forbids an inmate from running a business from prison, upon Knight's incarceration, Death Row was left without one of its most vital players. In 1997, Death Row's legal problems mounted. With Knight in prison and Death Row's longtime general manager Norris Anderson acting as CEO in his stead, federal authorities launched a RICO, Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations investigation into Death Row's history and business practices. Among the subpoenaed was Solar Records, the company which had helped in the initial funding of Death Row, and which several months earlier had filed suit against the label, claiming they had never received compensation for their involvement in the production of The Chronic. Also, during this time, the Shakur estate filed a $150 million suit against Death Row, demanding back payments and royalties and the return of Shakur's master recordings, of which Death Row claimed ownership. The case was later settled out of court, with Shakur's masters being returned to his estate. The first album Death Row released after Knight's imprisonment was by female rap singer Lady of Rage. The album, called Necessary Roughness, did not sell well and created some question as to the viability of Death Row operating successfully without Knight at the helm. With the death of Shakur and the departure of Dr. Dre, there was tremendous pressure on the label to produce marketable artists. Though a posthumous release from Shakur, as well as Snoop Doggy Dogg's The Dogfather, each premiered at #1 on Billboard's chart.
Talking about LBC. Am I tripping, y'all? Man, when I grow up, I wanna be like.
Death Row's roster was less promising in 1997 than it had been the previous year. That's the label's trouble. Its last highly successful crossover singer, Snoop Doggy Dogg, left Death Row in January 1998, leaving the company with only a handful of bankable acts.
What happened at Death Row after Tupac died?
Everything. It was crumbling. Tupac died, Suge got locked up, Snoop left, so the empire was falling. It was crumbling.
Officially, the Reign of Terror ceased to exist, and the slogan "Kill or Be Killed" embodied in Death Row turned out to be too contradictory and unstable. The label was still living on artist albums for several years, but 10 years later, in 2006, Knight filed for bankruptcy and declared himself and Death Row Records bankrupt. He has a debt of more than $100 million. The label changed hands. In January 2015, Knight was arrested. It is reported that on January 29th, he hit 2 people with a pickup truck. One of them later died in the hospital, the second survived, but received injuries. The victim was Terry Carter, co-founder of Heavyweight Records and a friend of Knight. The second was Clay Sloan, who managed to survive. According to witnesses, they drove up to the nearest diner where they were arguing about something. At some point, the dispute escalated, and according to police, Knight then got into a pickup truck and ran them over. The next day, Knight himself came to one of the Los Angeles police stations where he was detained. Knight's lawyer said that Knight had no intention of killing anyone. He accidentally knocked them down while trying to escape from the scene of the escalated conflict. On September 21st, 2018, Suge Knight was sentenced to a total of 28 years in prison. The former head of Death Row refused to contest the charge of murder committed in a state of passion, as a result of which he received a 22-year prison sentence. Suge received an additional 6 years because of the violated law of 3 mistakes, according to which the court has the right to sentence a person to a longer prison term for 3 crimes committed in the past. In February, Snoop Dogg bought Death Row Records. The date of the deal was not disclosed, but Snoop wants to make the brand great again.
It should be in my hands. I should be running that shit just like I'm in position at Def Jam. Death Row means more to me because I helped create that.
Right.
I think they should give me that, let me run that shit, put the merchandise out.
He has already released a new album under his original label.
She a bit lost. I kick it off of my penthouse loft downtown across the city. She's a ditty.
That's the story of Death Row. On what topic should I make the next video? Thank you all for watching and see you soon.